Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Well, everyone, I'm so grateful to be here. It's a new year. Here we are in 2026. And who would have thought of it? As we began this podcast 4 years ago, I don't know if Janie and I would have ever dreamed that we would still be doing this, but we are fueled and inspired by your constant encouragement and your kind words. And so here we go again. I think one of the most significant events that may have happened for many of us over the Christmas holidays was the passing of Elder Jeffrey R. Holland. And so this episode today, and maybe a couple episodes after, we'll see how this goes, will be a joint episode with our Preserving Families podcast, as well as our Stand By My Servants podcast. And I think I'd like to begin this way. And by the way, Janie's not here. She's on baby duty. One of our grandchildren was just born in Dallas. First name McKenna, middle name Holland. And already proud of that granddaughter for bearing that name of Elder Holland. And so Janie would love to be here because when I told her the idea of talking about some of Elder Holland's teachings on the family, she got really excited about that. And I think she'll be able to join us for the next episode. But I just wanted to lay a little bit of a foundation here. And there's so many layers and so many directions that we could go as we talk about Elder Holland as not only a prophet, seer, and revelator, but an inspiring person who had the ability to lift and to build and to give strength. I mean, if you want to talk about Elder Holland as a family man, just that trait alone, his ability to lift people up, to build people, to edify, to say kind words, and to make people feel better than they probably really were or how they really felt, I think is such a gift. But for me, maybe I can set up our content today this way. Years ago, I was in a meeting, and it may have been 30 years ago now, 35 years ago. And in that meeting, it was a training meeting, and it was among seminary institute teachers. And the man who instructed us, who was just awesome, the kind of man that you just wanted to be like one day, told the story of growing up in a home where he didn't really have a good father. And I don't remember all the details about that, whether his father was abusive or neglectful or had addictions, or I just don't remember. All I remember is he said basically, even though he had a dad, that he really was raised by a single mother. And as he grew up and had the opportunity later to be married and begin to have a family of his own, he recognized that he had such a poor role model of a father growing up that he needed to turn and look somewhere. And one of the places that he chose to look was at the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles and other general authorities, frankly. He looked to their words and their teachings and their examples, if he could find those examples and see those examples, as the kind of family man he wanted to be. Now, I'm going to tell you that I came to know this man even more when I came to BYU, and he had been a professor there now for some time and was just so well respected and admired by so many of our faculty for being such a great leader and teacher and had such a calm and gentle demeanor. But I remember when he retired, his family came to hear his last message to our faculty, and you could just tell that this man had raised an incredible family. But one of the ways he did it was by looking closely and watching the prophets and the apostles and other church leaders, once again, not by what so much they did, but certainly by what they taught. And I just resonate with that. I feel the same way. I feel that growing up the way that I was raised, and then coming into the church, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and then being married and beginning to have our own family, I also began to look around for mentors and men that I could look to kind of show me the way of parenthood. and how to be good dads and how to be good husbands. And the first place I looked was in our ward in Mesa, Arizona at the time, was just full of those examples. I mean, we just had an incredible, stellar ward with incredible men who were just great men. They were scouters, they were campers, they were outdoors they were athletic, but they loved their families, they taught their children the gospel. They were great examples in so many different ways, and I remember just watching them and taking notes as a young father, wanting to be like them. A lot of these men had teenagers and kids in college at the time, and our oldest was like 1 or 2 years old. So my wife Janie and I were just taking notes, watching these great families. They had no idea that we were watching them so closely, but we were watching them, and we wanted to become like them. And then, like the good brother I told you about, the other place to look was at our apostles and prophets and other general authorities. And for me, I didn't have to look too far. You know, as a student at Brigham Young University in the 1980s, Jeffrey R. Holland was our president, and Sister Patricia Holland was right by his side. And it was one of the most amazing couples that you could stick in front of a bunch of college students, 30,000 college students, looking at them for guidance and direction, and boy, did they provide it. And then throughout my life, I've just continued to study, listen to Elder Holland's messages, watch his life, observe closely, and I've learned so much from him that has inspired me and helped me be a better parent. And I think Janie would say the same thing. And so one of the things I wanted to do today is just share some of the things I've learned from Elder Holland that have helped inspire me to be a better family person, a better parent for sure. And so if you don't mind, I'm just going to share some of these with you. The talk that Elder Holland gave as the president of BYU was called That Our Children May Know. And it was a talk given in August of 1981 at Education Week. And this is what Elder Holland said, and I've never, ever forgotten it. Basically, he said, a simple reminder that this church is always only one generation away from extinction. Now, that does not change, however many decades old we are now. It was true in 1840, it was true in 1891, and it's true in 1981. We are always just one generation away from extinction. All we would have to do, I assume, to destroy this work is stop teaching our children for one generation. Just everybody stop. Close the book, seal up your heart, keep your mouth shut, and don't bear a testimony. And in one generation, it would be 1820 all over again. And then President Holland said this, that could happen. It won't happen. It mustn't happen. It won't happen in 1981 or in 1991, but it could if we cease to accept the obligation upon us, always upon those who have known and believed the truth, to teach it, especially to their children. Now, once again, where I go with that is what was Elder Holland teaching me? He was reminding me that as a parent, that one of my most important duties is to teach my children the gospel of Jesus Christ. And of course, to teach them every life skill that I can, to equip them to be adults, to be responsible citizens, to be wonderful saints. That's certainly my responsibility. And by the way, I've never ever thought or felt that that was the church's responsibility to do that. As I understand it, the responsibility of the church is to back up what my wife and I are teaching in our home, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ. But we have to teach it, and we have to prepare our children for adulthood, and what better way to do it than by teaching them? And that teaching is direct, but it's informal, but it also can be very indirect and informal. But we are always teaching. By the way, I always love the law of two witnesses. Brother Tad Callister's talk, parents, the prime gospel teachers of their children, said that as parents, we are to be the prime gospel teachers and examples for our children, not the bishop, not the Sunday school, the young women or the young men, but the parents. As their prime gospel teachers, we can teach them the power and reality of the atonement, of their identity and divine destiny, and in so doing give them a rock foundation upon which to build. When all is said and done, the home is the ideal forum for teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. I've just always believed that. Elder Holland taught it, Brother Callister taught it, many have taught it, and it's something that we ought to try to live, and it's certainly a role that we should take seriously. I always wanted my children to learn the gospel from me first, from my wife first, in our home first, knowing that the church would back up what we were teaching. Thank you, Elder Holland, for that one. Now, the second talk that I will mention that had such a profound impact on me, even though it was given when I was still a missionary in the mission field. It was April of 1983. Some of you may remember, but back in those days, it wasn't unusual to have guest speakers speak in the priesthood session of General Conference. Lavelle Edwards spoke. Devin Durant, the BYU basketball star, spoke. Don Lynn, the Mormon astronaut, spoke. There was Peter Vidmar, Olympic gold medalist, spoke. So we had all these kind of guest speakers, and in the April conference of '83, the guest speakers were Matthew Holland, a 16-year-old priest at the time, and President Jeffrey R. Holland of BYU. They spoke in tandem. Matthew spoke first, and then Elder Holland spoke next. And by the way, I'm just going to assume that both of them probably thought that this is going to be the one and only time that we'll ever speak in General Conference, so we ought to make it really good. And both of their talks were fantastic, but who would have ever known that just, a little more than 10 years later, Elder Holland would be an apostle, and who would have known years later that Matthew Holland would be a member of the Quorum of the 70, and that they would do a lot more speaking than they ever dreamed that they would do. But here's my thought. If I'm Jeffrey R. Holland in 1983, and I'm the president of BYU, and I'm asked to speak in the priesthood session of General Conference, not only am I going to prepare for like 5 or 6 months for that talk, so that it is by far the greatest message that I've ever shared in my life, right? But I'm also going to want to make sure that the content is pretty awesome, and of course, I do want to come out of that experience. And I think most of you would say the same thing, but I want to come out of that experience having people say, "Hey, that guy did a great job. That was a really great talk." Well, that's why the talk is so surprising. Because knowing that it may have been one of his only talks that he would ever give at General Conference, what does Elder Holland do? He shares the experience of one of his failures as a parent. I mean, this was pretty bold for Elder Holland to do, but let me just take a time out here for a minute. Why do we love Elder Holland so much? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but here's one. Elder Holland is not afraid to open himself up and to share and to be vulnerable. And not everyone does that, and I get that. I mean, a lot of our leaders are more private, and I understand that privacy, and not everyone wants to really just open up and share. But then once again, look at the volume of expressions of love and gratitude to Elder Holland in the days after his passing on social media. I think it was more than I've ever seen for any church leader. And why was that? I don't know all the reasons, but I will tell you one, I think. And that is because Elder Holland was so open with us and so loving and so willing to open the door and let us into his life a little bit. And we just appreciated it so much because he became so human to us. He became just another person. He became like your next door neighbor. And we all felt that we were best friends with this man that most of us had never met in our life, right? All right, now back to the talk. You ready? And by the way, as I go back to 1983 and think of myself as a missionary, just forming thoughts in my mind of what my life would be like when I got home and finding someone to marry and wanting to be a really awesome dad and a great husband and all those things. To read what I'm about to read to you with Elder Holland was me saying, this is what I want. I want this. And here's what he said. May I offer just this much encouragement regarding such a great responsibility? And he's talking about the responsibility of parents. What I cherish in my relationship with Matt is that he is, along with his mother and sister and brother, my closest, dearest friend. And I remember reading that and saying, that's what I want. I want to be best friends with my kids. And then he said, I'd rather be here at this priesthood meeting tonight with my son than with any other male companion in this world. I love to be with him. We talk a lot. We laugh a lot. We play one-on-one basketball. We play tennis and racquetball, though I refuse to play golf with him. And he says, that's a private joke. We discuss problems. I am the president of a small university, and he's the president of a large high school class. We compare notes and offer suggestions and share each other's challenges. I pray for him and have cried with him, and I am immensely proud of him. We've talked long into the night, lying on his waterbed. And he kind of makes a joke about waterbeds, but we'll just pass through that one. I can talk to Matt about how he is enjoying seminary because I try to talk to him about all of his classes at school. We often imagine together what his mission will be like because he knows how much my mission meant to me. And he asked me about temple marriage because he knows I am absolutely crazy about his mother. He wants his future wife to be like her and for them to have what we have. Now, once again, I'm hearing that as a missionary and thinking, this is what I want. Elder Holland is teaching me without even really trying to teach me. I'm hearing the ideal here of what I would like to have one day. And that's one of the things Elder Holland gave to me, is provided that vision. And then he said this, may I share a brief but painful moment from my own inadequate efforts as a father. And by the way, this is a long story, and I recognize you don't want to hear me read this whole thing. We'll have Elder Holland express some of this, but I just want to get us started in the story. He said, early in our married life, my young family and I were laboring through graduate school at a university in New England. Pat was the Relief Society president in our ward, and I was serving in our stake presidency. I was going to school full-time and teaching half-time. We had 2 small children then, with little money and lots of pressures. In fact, our life was about like yours. One evening, I came home from long hours at school, feeling the proverbial weight of the world on my shoulders, and everything seemed to be especially demanding and discouraging and dark, and I wondered if the dawn would ever come. And then as I walked into our small student apartment, there was an unusual silence in the room. What's the trouble? I asked. Matthew has something he wants to tell you, Pat said. Matt, what do you have to tell me? He was quietly playing with his toys in the corner of the room, trying very hard not to hear me. Matt, I said a little louder, do you have something to tell me? He stopped playing, but for a moment didn't look up. Then these 2 enormous, tear-filled brown eyes turned toward me, and with only the pain a 5-year-old could know, he said, I didn't mind Mommy tonight, and I spoke back to her. With that, he burst into tears, and then his entire little body shook with grief. A childish indiscretion had been noted, a painful confession had been offered, and the growth of a 5-year-old was continuing, and loving reconciliation could have been wonderfully underway. Everything might have been just terrific, except for me. If you can imagine such an idiotic thing, I lost my temper. And it wasn't that I lost it with Matt. It was with 101 other things on my mind. But he didn't know that, and I wasn't disciplined enough to admit it, and he got the whole load of bricks. I told him how disappointed I was and how much more I thought I could have expected from him. I sounded like the parental pygmy I was, and then I did what I'd never done before in this life. I told him that he was to go straight to bed and that I would not be in to say his prayers with him or to read him a bedtime story. Muffling his sobs, he obediently went to his bedside where he knelt alone to say his prayers. Then he stained his little pillow with tears his father should have been wiping away. If you think the silence upon my arrival was heavy, you should have felt it now. Pat did not say a word. She did not have to. I felt terrible. Now time out for just a minute. Now I'm reading that story 10 years later and 20 years later as a father. First as a young father and then as a little older father with teenagers, and then even as a father with college children. I bet there's not a father in the church that hasn't read that story that could totally relate to it. How many of us have definitely taken out our frustrations from our own personal lives, our professional lives, maybe even our church stresses that we bear, on our children, on our spouses? And as Elder Holland tells this story, he is just opening up and giving us a look right into his soul. And guess what he's saying? You know what? I'm with you. I am with you. And it's going to be okay, right? I mean, here's what I'm thinking as a maybe, I don't know, 35-year-old dad or a 40-year-old dad with frustrations in my life with raising children or whatever, and having some difficulty here and there. That, gosh, Elder Holland turned out pretty good. And he had a bad day or two. Maybe I can turn out okay still, right? Well, Elder Holland said this back to him. Later, as we knelt by our own bed, my feeble prayer for blessings upon my family fell back on my ears with a horrible hollow ring. I wanted to get up off my knees right then and go back to Matt and ask for his forgiveness, but he was long since peacefully asleep. My relief was not so soon coming, but finally I fell asleep and began to dream, which I seldom do. I dreamed that Matt and I were packing 2 cars for a move. For some reason, his mother and baby sister were not present, and as we finished, I turned to him and said, "Okay, Matt, I'll drive 1 car, and you drive the other." Now I think it would be very appropriate to let Elder Holland tell the rest of this story.
This 5-year-old very obediently crawled up onto the seat and tried to grasp the massive steering wheel. I walked over to the other car and started the motor. As I began to pull away, I looked to see how my son was doing. He was trying. Oh, how he was trying. He tried to reach the pedals, but he couldn't. He was also turning knobs and pushing buttons, trying to start the motor. He could scarcely be seen over the dashboard, but there, staring out at me again, were those same immense, tear-filled, beautiful brown eyes. As I pulled away, he cried out to me, "Daddy, don't leave me. I don't know how to do it. I am too little." And I drove away. A short time later, driving down that desert road in my dream, how long I do not know, I suddenly realized in one stark, horrifying moment what I had done. I slammed my dream car to a stop, threw open the door, and started to run as fast as I could. I left car, keys, belongings, and all, and I ran. The pavement was so hot it burned my feet, and tears blinded my straining effort to see this child somewhere on the horizon. I kept running, praying, pleading to be forgiven and to find my boy safe and secure. As I rounded a curve, nearly ready to drop from physical and emotional exhaustion, I saw the unfamiliar car I had left Matt to drive. It was pulled carefully off to the side of the road, and he was laughing and playing nearby. An older man was with him, a stranger, playing and responding to his games. Matt saw me and cried out something like, "Hi, Dad, we're having fun." Obviously, he had already forgiven and forgotten my terrible transgression against him. But I dreaded the older man's gaze, which followed my every move. I tried to say, "Thank you," but his eyes were filled with sorrow and disappointment. I muttered an awkward apology, and the stranger said simply, "You should not have left him alone to do this difficult thing. It would not have been asked of you." With that, my dream ended, and I shot upright in my bed. My pillow was now stained with perspiration and tears. I threw off the covers and ran to the little metal camp cot that was my son's bed. There, on my knees and through my tears, I cradled him in my arms and spoke to him while he slept. I told him that every dad makes mistakes, but that they don't mean to. I told him that it wasn't his fault that I had had a bad day. I told him that when boys are only 5 or 15, dads sometimes forget and think they're 50. I told him that I wanted him to be a small boy for a long, long time, because all too soon he would grow up and be a man. and wouldn't be playing on the floor with his toys when I came home. I told him that I loved him and his mother and his sister more than anything in this world, and that whatever challenges we had in life, we would face them together. I told him that never again would I withhold my affection or my forgiveness, and I prayed that never would he withhold them from me. I told him I was honored to be his father, and that I would try with all my heart to be worthy of such a great responsibility. Well, I have not proven to be the perfect father I vowed to be that night and 1,000 nights before and since, but I still want to be, and I believe this wise counsel from President Joseph F. Smith. Said he, "Brethren, if you will keep your children close to your heart, within the clasp of your arms, if you will make them feel that you love them and keep them near to you, they will not go very far from you, and they will not commit any very great sin. But it is when you turn them out of the home, turn them out of your affection, that is what drives them from you. If you wish your children to be taught in the principles of the gospel, if you wish them to love the truth and understand it, if you wish them to be obedient to and united with you, love them and prove that you love them by your every word and your every act toward them."
Now, once again, I just can't imagine any fathers in the audience that night at the tabernacle not being able to relate to Elder Holland's story of failure, in a sense, but also of redemption, of course. And I think for all of us, just to know that everyone has trouble, that every parent struggles to some degree, that we all make mistakes, and that it's okay, right? It's okay. We're going to make it. The Lord is with us. We're going to repent. We're going to gather ourselves up again, and it's real love that carries us through. And that's the message I get out of that talk from Elder Holland. I think I was inspired to know that even though you make mistakes as a father, don't give up. Keep trying. And we know that that message of keep trying comes forth from Elder Holland again and again and again. Now another talk I would refer to you was a talk that Elder Holland gave in October of 1993 called Look to God and Live. And in that talk, Elder Holland finishes, and by the way, it's the last talk that he gave as a member of the Quorum of the 70. From this point on, he's going to be an apostle. But in that talk, Elder Holland tells something very touching. And once again, it's not so much about parenthood, but at least it's about children and what children can teach us. He said, "Katie Lewis is my neighbor. Her father, Randy, is my bishop. Her mother, Melanie, is a saint, and her older brother, Jimmy, is battling leukemia. Sister Lewis recently recounted for me the unspeakable fear and grief that came to their family when Jimmy's illness was diagnosed. She spoke of the tears and the waves of sorrow that any mother would experience with a prognosis as grim as Jimmy's was. But like the faithful Latter-day Saints they are, the Lewises turned to God with urgency and with faith and with hope. They fasted and prayed and fasted, and they went again and again to the temple. One day, Sister Lewis came home from a temple session weary and worried, feeling the impact of so many days and nights of fear, being held at bay only by monumental faith. As she entered her home, 4-year-old Katie ran up to her, with love in her eyes and a crumpled sheaf of papers in her hand. Holding the papers out to her mother, she said enthusiastically, "Mommy, do you know what these are?" Sister Lewis said frankly that her first impulse was to deflect Katie's zeal and say she didn't feel like playing just then. But she thought of her children, all of her children, and the possible regret of missed opportunities and little lives that passed too swiftly. So she smiled through her sorrow and said, "No, Katie, I don't know what they are. Please tell me." "They are the scriptures," Katie beamed back. "And do you know what they say?" Sister Lewis stopped smiling, gazed deeply at this little child, knelt down at her level and said, "Tell me, Katie, what do the scriptures say?" They say, trust Jesus. And then she was gone. Sister Lewis said that as she stood back up holding a fistful of her 4-year-old scribbling, she felt near tangible arms of peace encircle her weary soul, and a divine stillness calm her troubled heart. Katie Lewis, angel and minister of grace, I am with you, Elder Holland said. In a world of some discouragement, sorrow, and overmuch sin, in times when fear and despair seem to prevail, when humanity is feverish with no worldly physicians in sight, I say too, trust Jesus. Let him still the tempest and ride upon the storm. Believe that he can lift all mankind from its bed of affliction in time and eternity. Now, once again, everyone, I recognize that that's not necessarily a story of Elder Holland as a parent, but it certainly is a parenting story. It's a story about, in my mind, what our children can teach us. That out of the mouth of babes come comforting and incredible doctrinal truths and messages if we'll just pay attention. It's also a reminder to all of us that, of course, we're all going to have trials and challenges. Maybe it won't be leukemia. Maybe it'll be a messy room or something even less than that. But I think there's a message there from Elder Holland that even on our worst days as parents, that we just trust in the Lord. We trust Jesus, that things are going to be okay. It's going to work out. And that there is comfort in sight. The Lord is and does provide great comfort and great peace to us, regardless of what our challenges are in our families. Elder Holland, thank you for that great message. Now, although there are so many more things to say, and I think I'll share those when Janie comes next time. We'll talk about some of those other stories. I think I'll end with this one, and the reason why is because I don't think it's as well known. I Stand All Amazed was actually an article printed in the Ensign in 1986. And then it's in one of Elder Holland's books, On Earth as It Is in Heaven. But it's not as a common story, and I just really appreciate it. And I want to share it with you because I had this experience before and maybe many times over, and it's just really cool. So he says this: I recall just a few years ago seeing a drama enacted at the Salt Lake Airport. On this particular day, I got off an airplane and walked into the terminal. By the way, consider this in the day when you had to walk down the steps on the apron of the terminal, or of the runway, and then you had to walk, across the runway and into the airport. He said it was immediately obvious that a missionary was coming home because the airport was astir with conspicuous-looking missionary friends and missionary relatives. I tried to pick out the immediate family members. There was a father who did not look particularly comfortable in an awkward-fitting, slightly out-of-fashion suit. He seemed to be a man of the soil, with a suntan and large work-scarred hands. His white shirt was a little frayed and was probably never worn except on Sunday. There was a mother who was quite thin, looking as if she had worked very hard in her life. She had in her hand a handkerchief. I think it must have been linen because it looked like tissue. It was just shredded from the anticipation that only a mother of a returning missionary could know. There was a beautiful girl who, well, you know about girls and returning missionaries. She appeared to be on the verge of cardiac arrest. I thought if that young man didn't come soon, she would not make it without some oxygen. 2 or 3 younger brothers and sisters were running around, largely oblivious to the scene that was unfolding. I walked past them all and started for the front of the terminal, and then I thought to myself, this is one of the special human dramas in our lives. Stick around and enjoy it. And so I stopped. I slipped into the back of the crowd to wait and watch, and the passengers started to come off the plane. I found myself starting to bet, and Elder Holland interjects, church-approved betting, of course, as to who would make the break first. I thought probably of the girlfriend who would want to most of all, but undoubtedly she was struggling with some discretion. 2 years is a long time, and maybe one shouldn't appear too assertive. And then the look at that handkerchief convinced me that the mother was probably the one. She obviously needed to hold something, so the child she had carried and nurtured and gone down into the valley of the shadow of death to deliver would be just what the doctor ordered. Or perhaps it'd be the boisterous little brother if he happened to look up long enough to know that the plane was in. As I sat there weighing these options, I saw the missionary start to come down the stairs. I knew he was the one by the squeal of the crowd, and he looked like Captain Moroni, clean and handsome and straight and tall. Undoubtedly, he had known the sacrifice this mission had meant to his father and mother, and it had made him exactly the missionary he appeared to be. He had his hair trimmed for the trip home. His suit was worn but clean. His slightly tattered raincoat was still protecting him from the chill his mother had so often warned him about. He came to the bottom of the steps and started out across the apron toward our building. And then, sure enough, someone couldn't take it any longer. But it wasn't the mother, and it wasn't the girlfriend, and it wasn't even the rowdy little brother. That big, slightly awkward, quiet, and bronzed giant of a man put an elbow into the rib cage of a flight attendant and ran, just simply ran, out onto that apron and swept his son up into his arms. The oxygen summoned for the girlfriend could have now been better directed towards the missionary. He was probably about 6'2" or so. But this big bear of a father grabbed him, took him clear off his feet, and held him for a long, long time. He just held him and said nothing. The boy dropped his briefcase, put both arms around his dad, and they held each other very tightly. It seemed like all eternity stood still for a precious moment in the Salt Lake City airport, which was the center of the entire universe. It was as though all the world had gone silent out of respect for such a sacred moment. And then I thought about God, the eternal Father, watching his son go out to serve, to sacrifice when he didn't have to do it. Paying his own way, so to speak, costing everything. He had saved all of his life to give. And at that precious moment, it was not too difficult to imagine that Father speaking with some emotion to those who could hear, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And it was also possible to imagine that triumphant returning son saying, "It is finished, Father, and into thy hands I commend my spirit." Now, I don't know what kind of 7-league boots, and I had to look up 7-league boots, everyone. One step equals about 20 miles. I don't know what kind of 7-league boots a father uses to rush through the spaces of eternity. But even in my limited imagination, I can see that reunion in the heavens, and I pray for one like it, for you and for me. I pray for reconciliation and for forgiveness, for mercy, and for the Christian growth and Christian character we must develop if we are to enjoy such a moment fully. I stand all amazed that even for a man like me, full of egotism and transgression and intolerance and impatient, that there is a chance. But I've heard the good news correctly. If I've heard it correctly, there is a chance for me and for you, and for everyone who's willing to keep hoping and to keep trying and to allow others the same privilege. Well, once again, everyone, what does that teach us about parenthood? And I remember hearing that story, and our children were small, but thinking how cool that reunion would be one day with a son or daughter coming home from the mission field, enacting really a sacred scene, and it really is sacred when you think of it, and metaphoric as you think of the eternal Father and us in a reunion like that. I remember a few years ago flying from Texas to BYU up here to Provo for a conference with another colleague. And the same thing happened to us. As we got off the plane, we recognized that, wait, there's some missionaries on another plane behind us, and they were all coming off. And same thing, we were kind of in a hurry to get down to Provo to get to the meeting that we had flown in for. But we both had a feeling of, why don't we just stop and watch? That's kind of a cool thing to do, right? To just watch that reunion when that missionary comes through the airport and runs into the arms of his parents and his siblings. It's such a sacred moment, right? It's just, there's something so cool about that. But I love that Elder Holland shared that story, because once again, as a young father, hearing that story, it made me want to have a reunion like that with my children. And I'm happy to report to say that those reunions happened. And it was a sacred and happy and joyful experience. I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for President and Elder Jeffrey R. Holland for the many, many things he's taught me about being a parent, just by the stories that he's told, by the example, by the opening up and sharing the difficult things, being vulnerable, but also being inspirational. Every story that I've told you today wants me to be better at being a dad, at being a grandfather, even at being a husband. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful week. And I look forward to returning again next week with more on Elder Holland. Until then, have a great week.